Hello, in this video we will discuss about the pathophysiology of insulin resistance. So the insulin resistance means the insulin will not unable to bind with the receptor with the several tissue. So it is the type 2 diabetes mellitus, the diabetes mellitus type 2. While the type 1 is involved the beta cell to autoimmune disorder to damage the beta cell. So this is the pancreas contain beta cell of the person and the glucose. For example, when we will intake the protein and glucose will trigger the beta cell to release the insulin. How it is possible? Let's begin to understand. This is the cell, the beta cell, and the glucose hyperglycemia will occur when the blood glucose rise. So the glucose will enter into the cell will lead to glycolysis and the electron transport chain to produce ATP more, and the GLUT channel is involved without insulin. So in this way the potassium will not move out due to the increasing of ATP will inhibit, while will lead to depolarization, will lead to influx of the calcium, and calcium will lead to exocytosis of the insulin vesicle. And in insulin resistant beta cell is healthy but cell insulin receptor damage. So this is the insulin when released from the pancreas. So the blood vessel, this is. So these are the several type of tissue, but I am understanding, for example, the muscle and liver. So this is the insulin resistance. Let's begin to understand how. So here you can see this is the cell which that contain GLUT vesicles inside. It requires the insulin will bind with the insulin receptor, but insulin receptor will not working correctly. So that is why the glucose will not move inside. That is why the hyperglycemia will occur due to the GLUT channel creation will impossible because the insulin resistance, and on the other hand the hyperglycemia, while on the other hand the lipolysis will occur because the insulin will not bind with the adipocyte, and in this way the lipolysis will occur for the beta oxidation to consume the energy from the ketones, so the ketogenesis and the beta oxidation of fatty acid. So in this way, here is a very low density lipoprotein will produce because the triacylglycerol and free fatty acid will be rise in the blood circulatory system. It will lead to hypercholesteremia and hyperlipidemia. While on the other hand, the healthy liver, which that is basically not bind with the glucose entry, and the glucose will not enter. So the basically here is the metformin is the drug which that trigger the insulin-like growth factor for influx of the glucose for normally. So here is the basically non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which that is reversible, but the deposition of fat due to the excessive amount of the low density lipoprotein in the blood circulatory system move through portal vein and will lead to irreversible cirrhosis and fibrosis if not cured. So the sign and symptom is the fatigue, weight loss, weakness, increase the appetite, and polyuria and polydipsia, as well as the glycosuria. So the risk factor we will discuss if, so the genetic factors, epigenetic mean the environmental changes or some DNA changes as well as the DNA problem and mutation, while the genetic factors also. But on the other hand, the chronic eating, the not fasting and not a restriction of diet and calorie intake, excessive overeating sugar, which that will lead to continuously rises the spike of the insulin will bind again and again will damage the insulin receptor, while the obesity and aging about 40 years, which that is also involved. So on the other hand, the hyperglycemia when occur due to the insulin resistance by this mechanism, so the cell will lose their water through osmosis to move into the blood circulatory system will lead to hypertension because the volume of the blood will rise when the water will be enter from the tissue, peripheral tissue, and blood vessel damage, brain, heart, and stroke. And on the other hand, the arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis can be possible later on. We will discuss in this video next. So this is the eyes, which that's contain retina, is used for making image, contain a very thin endothelial containing a blood vessel is known as a capillary, and capillary will be damaged due to the excessive amount of glucose will rise. In this way, the damage of the capillary of eyes by several complications, for example rise of the blood volume as well as the reactive oxygen species due to the inflammation, and on the other hand the rupturing the angiolysis to blind. So let's begin to understand what will be happen in the blood circulatory system, the blood vessels. This is the blood vessel, remember. So we will look inside of the blood vessel. What is the content inside of the blood vessel? So basically the inside is basically the endothelial cell. This endothelial cell inside in the lumen contain a RBC, low density lipoprotein, very low density lipoprotein and high density lipoprotein, the different type of content. But in this case, the low density lipoprotein will rise, but on the other hand, the glucose also rise lead to hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia is very important. In this way, the GLUT2 channel are present in the endothelial cell, used without the insulin to influx into the endothelial cell, and the rise in the glucose will lead to produce more glycolysis as well as electron transport chain, and more glycolysis and electron transport chain in the absence of oxygen will lead to produce more ATP, and reactive oxygen species will produce by the inflammation of the more reactivity of the endothelial cell, and in this way the cytokines will be released due to the inflammation of the endothelial cell. The cytokines will move into the tunica intima as well as the lumen of the blood vessel. So the reactive oxygen species and nitric oxide also produced will lead to damage the other endothelial cell, and in this way the damaging will lead to inflammation more, will lead to more permeability. The permeability means the junction will be breakdown between the endothelial cell. So in this way, the extracellular space will increase more. So the tunica intima between the lumen and tunica intima. So in this way, the lipids will be deposited into the tunica intima. And in this way, the low density lipoprotein will be enter into the tunica intima of the blood vessel, remember. So in this way, the monocyte is circulating around the circulatory system, and in this the monocyte containing VLA4 ligand, and in this way the adhesive molecule is known as the VCAM1, the vascular cell adhesion molecule 1, which that will be bound with the monocyte. After the binding with the monocyte will lead to influx, the inward movement through a space between the endothelial cell to permeability increase by this binding the adhesion molecule. After this binding, the a monocyte will be entered due to the response of the lipid deposition into the tunica intima, and lipids itself will produce the reactive oxygen species as well as the inflammatory cytokines when between the tunica intima. So in this, the monocyte basically will engulf after the proliferation into the macrophage. So the monocyte is important for proliferation into the macrophage, into the tunica intima when the permeability will increase, and in this way the monocyte will be entered after the adhesion molecule binding. And in this way the very low density lipoprotein will engulf is known as the endocytosis. After this, the endocytosis, the monocyte also enter more entry due to the positive feedback. On the other hand, the neutrophil is also enter for erythrocytosis. So on the other hand, here you can see this the cholesterol will rise, and the here is the MCSF are present in this manner, and in this the macrophage which that will convert into the foam cell when deposition of the fat after the endocytosis of the lipids and cholesterol. After this, here you can see this is the inner membrane which does contain a cell which that is between the tunica media, the tunica externa and tunica media or tunica intima. Between the tunica media contain a smooth muscle cell. This smooth muscle cell is very important for the vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So the reactive oxygen species and inflammatory mediators will produce from the cholesterol deposition as well as foam cell will permeability to move the muscle smooth muscle cell into the tunica intima, and in this way the core will be create, and the lipid core will create and the surrounding the smooth muscle cell, and the necrosis due to the necrotic factors and the necrosis of the foam cell of the macrophage, which that will lead to deposition, will lead to thrombosis and the arteriosclerosis. This is the character, and due to the pathophysiology of this is the insulin resistance, because the insulin resistance will lead to hyperglycemia, will rise the glucose, and the uptake of the glucose more into the endothelial cell will damage, and also the hypertension will lead to cause the thrombosis, as well as the high blood pressure will lead to rupture this plaque formation of the lipid core due to the instability of the core. So thanks for watching.